Thebes, 1250 BC. The heat isn't just a temperature. It is a physical weight, pressing down on the lungs, smelling of baked mud and drying blood. We are standing in the shadow of the Karnak Temple complex. To the modern eye, this is a ruin of beige stone. But close your eyes. Listen. Do you hear it? The rhythmic thumping of drums, the grinding of grain, the low, synchronized chanting of 10,000 throats. This wasn't just a place of worship. It was a factory, a sprawling industrial complex designed to manufacture one specific product: favor. We often picture ancient Egypt as a land of golden romance and mysterious magic. But strip away the Hollywood gloss, and you find a rigid, terrifying machine. The Nile was a hydraulic engine that powered the economy, but the fuel was human belief, extracted through rituals so visceral, so mechanically precise, that they blur the line between piety and horror. Tonight, the moon is full. The Feast of the Valley is beginning. And inside the high walls, a young woman named Merit is being prepared. She is not trembling because she is cold. She is trembling because she knows she has ceased to be a person. In the eyes of the high priest, she is no longer Merit. She is a component, a biological key designed to unlock the floodgates of the river. What happened next was one of history's most buried secrets. This isn't pure myth. This narrative is stitched together from the fragments left behind the graffiti in the hidden crevices of tombs, the sanitized official records of the priesthood, and the scandalous, albeit biased, accounts of Greek historians like Herodotus. We are peeling back the layers of gold leaf to see the iron gears beneath. If you have ever wondered how a civilization sustains itself for 3,000 years, hit the like button. The answer is uncomfortable. It requires order. It requires the absolute suppression of the individual for the survival of the state. Consider the environment. The Egyptian worldview was dominated by mat cosmic order. Chaos, or Isfet, was the enemy. To keep the sun rising, to keep the crops growing, the machine had to run. And the machine ran on distinct protocols. Every prayer was an invoice. Every ritual was a transaction. And in the hidden chambers of the temples, the currency was often flesh. The priesthood wasn't just a religious body. It was a bureaucracy of control. They managed the grain silos, the land deeds, and the bodies of the faithful. When we speak of sexual rituals in ancient Egypt, we are not speaking of hedonism or orgies in the modern sense. We are speaking of state-mandated biological engineering. The logic was cold. The gods create life through generation. Therefore, to stimulate the gods, the act of generation must be performed, witnessed, and consecrated within the industrial confines of the temple. Let us zoom in. The micro. Let's return to Merit. She is a Shemite, a chantress of Amun. In the popular imagination, she is a seductress. In reality, she is a low-level employee in a massive corporation. She's been selected for the sacred marriage. This sounds poetic. It was not. It was a procedure. The preparation began days ago. It wasn't a beauty regimen. It was a sanitization process. She was shaved, scrubbed with natron salts until her skin was raw and fumigated with incense. This wasn't to make her attractive to a man. It was to remove the scent of her humanity. To the priests, her individual scent was a contaminant. She needed to be a blank slate, a sterile vessel for the gods' energy. She sits in a holding cell, a small room of mud brick within the temple precinct. She is not allowed to speak. Silence is part of the protocol. She is being depersonalized. We have records of the rations given to temple staff. Bread, beer, oil. Merit is on the ledger. She is an asset, indistinguishable from the cattle being herded into the slaughter court nearby. Her fear is irrelevant. The system does not account for emotions, only functions. She knows the stories. She knows that in the era of the early dynasties, attendants were sometimes buried with their kings. That practice had faded, replaced by symbolic magic, but the underlying threat remained: you belong to the god, and the god is hungry. The intermediary enters. He is a Sem priest, wearing the leopard skin draped over one shoulder, the mark of those who handle the dead and the divine. He does not look at Merit's face. He looks at a checklist, perhaps a mental one or a literal clay tablet. He checks her adornments. The heavy beaded collar, the menet necklace, which was heavy with symbolism of fertility. It is time, he says. Not a greeting, a command. This wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. That is the mistake we make when looking back. We want to see villains. But the Sem priest isn't a villain. He is a technician. He believes that if this ritual fails, the Nile will not flood. The crops will wither. Thousands will starve. In his mind, the violation of one woman's autonomy is a mathematical necessity for the survival of the millions. It is utilitarian horror. The machine of the Egyptian state demanded efficiency. Merit stands up. The weight of the gold and faience beads presses on her collarbone. She's walked through the corridors, past the pylons where the common people are never allowed to go. The air changes. It gets cooler, darker, smelling of myrrh and old stone. She is moving into the belly of the beast. While Merit walks in silence, outside, the world is screaming. We must address the festival of drunkenness. This was a state-sanctioned release valve, dedicated to the goddess Sekhmet, the lioness, the slaughterer, the lady of blood. This festival was mandatory chaos. The myth says that Sekhmet was going to destroy humanity, but Rio tricked her by dyeing beer red with ochre. She drank it, thinking it was blood, passed out, and humanity was saved. To commemorate this, the entire city was required to drink to the point of unconsciousness. But this wasn't a party. It was a ritualized delirium. Vats of beer, spiked with mandrake and other hallucinogens, were rolled out. The streets of Thebes became a churning ocean of bodies. In this state, social norms dissolved. The barriers between the classes, the scribe, the farmer, the noble melted away in a slurry of alcohol and mud. Sexual acts in the open were not just tolerated. They were interpreted as acts of vitality to combat the deathbringer Sekhmet. But look closer at the crowd. It isn't joy. It's desperation. They are drinking to survive the goddess's wrath. The sex is frantic, a hysterical affirmation of life in the face of a deity who eats people. It is industrialized hedonism. The priests watch from the high walls, tallying the jars of beer consumed, measuring the energy of the crowd. It is control masquerading as chaos. This wasn't improvised. It was policy. The sensory overload is designed to break the mind. The beating of the sistrums, those metal rattles sacred to Hathor, creates a constant metallic hiss, like 1,000 snakes. The smell is vomit, beer, roasting meat, and sweat. In this environment, consent becomes a nebulous concept. If the ritual demands copulation to appease a goddess, refusal is not just prudishness. It is heresy. It is treason. We see the macro here. The state orchestrating a mass psychological event to purge the population's aggression. By allowing this one night of absolute debauchery, they secure 364 days of obedience. It is the purge. It is strategy. And in the center of it, the individual is lost. A woman separated from her family in the crush becomes public property of the ritual. A man lost in the hallucination of the mandrake sees not a partner, but a divine archetype. They are not people anymore. They are puppets, acting out a theological play written thousands of years ago. Cut back to the silence. Merit has reached the inner sanctum. The noise of the festival is just a dull thrum through the thick stone walls, like the heartbeat of a distant leviathan. Here, the air is still. The room is dominated by the statue of the god Amun, or perhaps the ithyphallic Min. The statue is not merely stone. It is believed to be the living casing of the deity. This is where the divine marriage occurs. In some eras, This involved the high priest acting as the surrogate for the god. In others, it was a symbolic act involving the statue itself. We must tread carefully here, separating the Greek propaganda from the Egyptian reality. But the reality is arguably more chilling. If the high priest steps forward, he is not a man. He wears the mask of the god. He does not speak. He performs the act as a biological function of the cosmos. Merit is laid upon the offering table or a stone plinth. The stone is cold. The incense is choking. There is no romance. There is no seduction. There is only the heavy, suffocating weight of duty. She is being used to recharge the idol. The Egyptians believed that sexual energy was a literal force, like electricity. The ritual was a generator. They were extracting her vitality to jumpstart the universe for another year. It is the ultimate commodification of the body. She is a battery. This wasn't about pleasure. It was about infrastructure. The text described the pouring of the seed as an agricultural necessity. Just as the Nile deposits silt, the ritual deposits life force. But for Merit, staring up at the painted ceiling covered in stars that do not blink, the theology offers no comfort. The horror here is the silence, the absolute, crushing bureaucracy of the act. There are scribes nearby, perhaps just outside the curtain, ready to record that the ritual was completed, rite performed, mat restored. Her trauma is a line item. Her dissociation is a success metric. When it is over, she will not be comforted. She will be purified again, checking for impurities, and sent back to her quarters. She has served the machine. She is empty. If the rituals of Amun were cold and industrial, the rituals of the Apis bull were visceral and terrifyingly organic. The Apis bull was not just an animal. It was a god on earth, the living avatar of Ptah. It lived in a palace better than the pharaohs. It ate from gold plates. Greek writers like Diodorus Siculus describe a ritual that strains credibility, yet persists in the record. They claim that women exposed themselves to the bull or engaged in acts with it to induce fertility. While we must view this with skepticism, the Greeks loved to paint the Egyptians as barbarians. There is a kernel of truth in the obsession with bovine potency. The bull was the ultimate symbol of masculine power. Imagine the scene. The sacred precinct of the bull in Memphis. The animal is massive, a ton of muscle and unpredictable aggression. The women brought before it were not victims in the legal sense, but devotees, conditioned by a lifetime of propaganda to believe that the breath of this beast could grant them sons. The machine here works through indoctrination. It convinces the populace that proximity to danger is proximity to divinity. The horror is the lack of barriers. The priesthood allowed vulnerable women into the pen of a wild animal, framing the potential for injury, or worse, as a divine interaction. It was a game of Russian roulette played with biology. This brings us to the concept of sacred prostitution, or sexual service within the temple. The term is controversial among Egyptologists, but we know there were women titled the Harim of Min. Min, the god of erection and fertility. These women were not free agents. They were property of the temple estate. Their lives were dictated by the cycle of the harvest. When the crops were sown, the rituals were performed. When the river rose, the rituals were performed. They were trapped in a calendar of compulsory sexuality. It was a life of targeted dehumanization. They were fed well, dressed well, and stripped of all agency. They were the ornamental slaves of the theology. To the state, they were honored. To the modern eye, they were prisoners of a golden cage, their bodies colonized by the state religion. Now, we descend into the darkest part of the machine, the Necropolis, the city of the dead. Here, the most horrific intersection of sex and death occurred. And this is not speculation. This is documented law. Herodotus reports a chilling protocol. The wives of men of rank, when they die, are not given at once to be embalmed, but 3 or 4 days after. Why? Why let a body decompose in the Egyptian heat? Because the embalmers could not be trusted. The embalmers were the pariahs of society. They lived among the dead, smelling of natron and decay. They were necessary, but reviled. And within this marginalized group, a dark subculture festered. The temptation of the beautiful dead. The absolute power over a body that cannot say no. The state had to intervene. Think about that. The empire had to pass a law mandated by the bureaucracy to let women rot specifically to prevent necrophilia. This wasn't a one-time crime. It was a systemic issue. The machine had a flaw. The workers who processed the dead were cleaning them. It reveals a terrifying underbelly of the society that even in death, the female body was not safe. It was still an object, a thing to be used. The delay in embalming was a pragmatic, bureaucratic solution to a horrific human impulse. It wasn't mercy. It was damage control. Let's visualize the twist. The moment humanity breaks through the machine. Imagine a young embalmer. Let's call him Ka. He's part of this guild of outcasts. A body arrives. A high-born woman, beautiful, untouched by the delay because her family bribed the guards to bring her early. The other embalmers circle like jackals. This is the culture of the workshop. But Ka hesitates. In a world where the dead are husks, he sees the face of his sister or his mother. He steps between the body and the knife. A moment of tension. The machine grinds to a halt. For a second, the industrial processing of the corpse is interrupted by dignity. He covers her face. He begins the work properly, swiftly. This moment likely happened 1,000 times, and didn't happen 1,000 times. But the existence of the laws proves the prevalence of the crime. The Necropolis was a zone where the laws of the living broke down, and the darkest desires of the human psyche were unleashed upon those who could no longer speak. It turns the beautiful tomb paintings of the afterlife into a facade covering a grotesque reality. Fast forward, the sand covers everything. The machine stops. The empire falls. We jump to 2024, an excavation in the Valley of the Kings. We are not looking for gold. We are looking for the trash. The ostraca, shards of pottery used as scrap paper. Archaeologists find a pit. It's full of these shards. They aren't prayers. They are rosters. Workmen absent today. Excessive drinking. Complaint filed. Sexual misconduct in the workshop. The evidence of the horror is bureaucratic. We find the tags that were tied around the necks of the temple staff. We find the physical damage on the bones of women found in common graves near the temple precinct stress. Fractures consistent with heavy labor and repetitive strain, contradicting the art that shows them only dancing. The system reaction of the ancient empire was to sanitize history. They chiseled out the names of the disgraced. They rewrote the papyrus, but the bones don't lie. The forensic evidence suggests a life of immense physical stress for the harem women. They weren't lounging on pillows eating grapes. They were working. Their bodies were the gears of the state religion, ground down until they broke, and then discarded into the sand. We also find the execration texts, pottery bowls with the names of enemies written on them, smashed to curse them. But sometimes we find names of insiders, priests, officials, people who perhaps broke the protocol. The machine protected itself. If a ritual went wrong, if a priestess spoke out, if an embalmer was caught, they were erased. The horror of ancient Egypt isn't just what they did, it's how effectively they hid it. They built pyramids to distract us from the pits. They blinded us with gold so we wouldn't see the blood. It was a civilization masterclass in PR, and for thousands of years, it worked. Until we started reading the trash. We returned to the name Merit. She died 3,000 years ago. Her name was likely not recorded on any grand monument. She was a particle in the hydraulic engine of the Nile. Why does this matter? Why dig up this darkness? Because civilization versus barbarism is a lie we tell ourselves. We think we are different. But look at our world. We still have systems that commodify bodies. We still have institutions that prioritize the survival of the structure over the safety of the individual. The machine didn't die with the pharaohs. It just changed shape. It changed management. The story of the sexual rituals of Egypt is a mirror. It shows us what happens when religion and state power merge with absolute authority. It shows us that tradition is often just a fancy word for organized abuse. It forces us to ask, what are the rituals of our time that future historians will look back on with horror? What are the things we accept as necessary that are actually monstrous? This wasn't chaos. It was policy. It wasn't mercy. It was strategy. And Merit wasn't a myth. She was real. She breathed, she feared, and she vanished into the machine. If this deep dive into the buried secrets of the ancient world unsettled you, if it made you look at the pyramids differently, then we have done our job. Uncomfortable truths matter. They are the only things that keep us from repeating the past. Subscribe for more investigations into the dark machinery of history. Hit the bell. We are just getting started. And remember, history is written by the victors, but the truth is hidden in the trash.